is workshop number 7 in 3.5 days. So we're getting to the point that will be like when your mum couldn't remember the name of all the kids and she would just yell all of them at you. So if we start going Boulogne, Baloo, Southern Downs, Western Downs, please, we apologise. It has been, 12.5-hour days I've been making Katrina Houghton do from ID. Please, I apologise in advance if we tend to do that today. If you're on the Zoom call and you are most interested in actually data from one of our other 9 council areas, so we have 10 across RDA, shoot me a little message in the chat and I will try and get you the presentation from the region. However, what you will see today, Kat's going to run you through Australia COVID data, Queensland COVID data, and then a little bit around Southern Downs data. So we'll send you the PowerPoint for those online if you're more interested in another region. However, that you'll see once we get on to navigating the site, all of the 10 portals, well, we've actually got 12, RDA Darling Downs Southwest portal, our 10 councils portal, and then one specifically for Southwest Red, which is the 6 councils far west. The actual navigation is exactly the same. They're all laid out exactly the same. So even though today might be Southern Downs data, you will find that it is all the same. Okay, so the actual navigation that Kat will take you through in the second half of today's webinar will be on Southern Downs site mainly, but they are all the same. So you're going to learn where to go find that data, which is what today's about. So before I hand over to Katrina Houghton from I just wanted to quickly, for those of you who don't know who RDA is, Regional Development Australia, there are 52 RDAs, sorry for using the acronym, across all of Australia. And we are partly funded by the Department of Infrastructure, so federal government. However, we are all independent and we can go get other funding and other projects and other grants elsewhere as well. So that's the RDA. We're run by an independent group of volunteers. So every RDA is run by an independent group of volunteers who are representative across our region. And we think very much regionally. So the region is this big footprint here. Just a small 23% of Queensland's land mass we represent. We have 10 councils, 7 state members and 2 federal members across that region. And part of our Department of Infrastructure Charter is that we facilitate between the 3 levels of government, business and industry and community. So the list of who isn't our stakeholders is a shorter list than who is. So as you can imagine, we're meant to have a very big helicopter view of all of that area, and we're really a connector and a collaborator. So we connect you up to help you progress projects and access the right people rather than wasting time going down the wrong avenues. We also get called upon quite often to be the independent facilitator. We've got no skin in the game. We're not a membership-based organisation. We don't actually, even though we're funded by the feds partly, we don't represent a particular level of government. So we're a good independent facilitator to bring everybody together. Under the charter that we're funded under the Department of Infrastructure funding, we have got 3 priorities. One is get more grants to the region, because that straight away is an economic impact for our region because you've won that money. And we want a bigger percentage of the buckets of funding that are out there to come to our region, obviously. So that's one of our priorities. The second is progress more projects. So we assist you in whether or not there's a barrier you need us to advocate or lobby for. Again, that progressing projects by making sure the right key stakeholders are actually working together. So we'll do a lot of that work. And our third one is we feed back to the federal government. So the federal government do fund the 52 RDAs and they use that RDA network to feed back to influence policy. Now, we have never seen that used as much as during COVID. So we were on 3 teleconferences a week with our minister during the peak of COVID. And they really did use the RDA networks to feed back, this needs to change to job seeker, this needs to change to job keeper, you now need to look at childcare, you know. All of that stuff got fed through the RDA network, and stuff that we've seen announced as part of the budget certainly was stuff that got discussed in those teleconferences. So it's not just infrastructure stuff. We will feed back something that our minister will then flag for Treasury or for Home Affairs. So please We've got some really good networks across the ground that have been really great at giving us that feedback, and they use us as that conduit back to the federal government. So I want to say thank you, keep that going. We're on weekly teleconferences with our minister at the moment. And I'm on one tomorrow, which is an update on the Building Better Regions Fund. So hopefully we'll have some more information around the criteria when that will be released. Our board, because we're an independent board, have got 4 priorities, and you'll find every RDA will be very different as to what their priorities are. So these are our 4. Usually in my RDA general presentation, I let you know that we fund this amazing tool called Economy ID, and we do it in partnership with our 10 councils. So your council partly funds this tool, and we funded the other half of it. But I'm not going to spend any time on that today because we have Kat, who is going to run you through the ID profile tool, and she's certainly the guru of all stuff ID. So I'm not going to waste your time on that. What I will say is, though, the RDA website, we have a funding tab on there. There's multiple tabs on the website, but one of them is a funding tab where we summarise all the grants that we can find from state, federal, corporates, all of those, so that you can have a look at that and try and marry up projects that you've got on your wish list with potential funding that's available. So that link there is the link direct to it. You will get, after today, a copy of my presentation, and you will get a copy of Kat's PowerPoint presentation as well. So please don't panic about needing to find that, but it's pretty damn easy to find. It's the RDA Darling Downs Southwest website, and along the top there's a tab that says funding. If you subscribe to our newsletter, every month Tim Smith, my assistant, he actually updates the grants, and he will send out a newsletter just to say, by the way, the grants are updated. They actually sit on the website 24/7, as long as the website doesn't go down. So you can access them at any time. His is just a reminder that they've just been refreshed and they've just been updated. So I would highly recommend that you can sign up to our newsletter on the home page of the RDA site. 2 other quick documents that I want to show you, and for those that are on the screen, hopefully you'll be able to see my video. One is under our employment and skills portfolio. We know at the moment getting staff is hard, which is crazy. We've got our highest unemployment rate ever, and we can't get staff. We have this virtual jobs fair happening next Tuesday. So if you know of a business or somebody who is struggling to get staff, please tell them to go to the virtual jobs fair. That link for that is actually employtoowoomba.net.au. And I have to let you know that under the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training, which I think is about to change their name, and they've got a new minister, which is state government, we are actually got a separate funding to facilitate their regional jobs committee, and that virtual jobs fair is coming out of that funding. So a bit different to the Department of Infrastructure funding. As I said, we're partly funded. We can go find other funding buckets, and that's another one that we've got the funding for to actually facilitate that regional jobs committees and the virtual jobs fair. Another document that I want to let you know about, and again, the digital copies of these you'll get emailed with the notes, so you don't have to try and look at it here, is this is the innovation journey. So on the tab, the RDA funding tab, most of the grants are actually for not-for-profit organisations, right? There is some for business, but most grants are for not-for-profits. The ones for business, most of them are summarised up in this document. So this is the business Bible of grants and programs. And it's one of the rare occasions that state and federal work together. So along the top here is state programs. Along the bottom here is federal programs. So it's a really great document if you're dealing with business. I try and always make sure Chambers of Commerce have got these so that they can give it to their business. But you'll get sent a digital copy of this. I've got some hard ones for you guys here in the room, but you'll get the digital as well. So that one there sums up the state and the federal programs. On the tab, also the funding tab on the RDA page is some of the ad hoc business, and because this is obviously a printed document, if something else has come out in the meantime, we've got it on the business tab on the RDA website. All right, that is enough from me. I really encourage people that if you're on Zoom to put any of your comments and stuff in the chat, which you'll find down the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I am now going to silence myself and hand over to Kat. Okay. Thanks, guys. Tech is not my strength.
I'm going to unmute that. I'm going to share my. No, it's not letting me go there. You have to just allow screen sharing there, mate. Try it. There we go. We're on. Yep. And let's see if this works now. Okay, let's go to display settings, duplicate screen. Okay, awesome. Yes, yes. All right, good, good. All right, guys, so I join you from a company called .id, the Population Experts, and we work with about 350 plus councils around Australia, providing them with economic data and population data so that it can help them make decisions. And also it can help them apply for grant opportunities, and they then can work with their communities to look at grant opportunities as well. Now, the first thing I'm going to run through today is the national, state and local impacts of coronavirus. And I think it's really important to note that even though in some of our regional Queensland communities in particular that I've been visiting lately, COVID hasn't actually really had a major effect, simply because they just don't have the exposure. However, there are some things happening both at the global level and at the national level that will have implications for what happens in this region. And there are some real opportunities, particularly for regional Queensland, to be taken advantage of during this time. So I'm going to run through exactly sort of what's happened over the previous year. And we can see here, we know that the impacts vary from region to region. That's due to the number of cases. So Victoria and New South Wales haven't performed as well as Queensland simply because of their exposure to the virus. Service sector exposure, tourism exposure, so international hotspots have really felt the full force of the virus as well. Also, our major activity centres like our CBDs have really felt the full force as well, as people moved out of the CBD for a period of time and still are not back in Brisbane CBD at the moment, what that means for our capital city. Also, places that are highly dependent on population growth, particularly from international sources. So those areas, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria, are really going to struggle over the next couple of years whilst we fight really hard to find that vaccine and we watch global cases hopefully coming down. So we know the virus is not yet under control, and in terms of globally, this virus is still not uncontained. And it's really important to know that at the moment, whilst in Australia we're almost starting to become immune to this virus in a sense, overseas we're still seeing about 60,000 cases a day, and they've gone into lockdown into Europe, and we're waiting to see what America does as well. Victoria is towards the end of the second wave, and we're looking forward to what's going to happen with our borders and when they're going to open, and what that means for our tourism regions in Queensland, and also in terms of population growth in Queensland. So the big economic fall. We know that the impacts from this particular crisis are much, much worse than the global financial crisis. Now, Australia remained in a pretty good position even after the GFC, whereas this crisis has hit us pretty hard and sent us straight into a recession. We know that this is more difficult, this crisis, simply because it's affected developing countries as much as it's affected the more advanced economies as well. Our major trading partners are expected to contract by about 3%. We are starting to see a bit of a revival in China, but this is difficult, not just in terms of our exporting and getting our product to market, but also getting imports into the country to create goods and to create those supply chains. And you'll notice that when you go to various supermarkets or big, store chains, that there's a lack of product in those places at the moment. It's really interesting the way, things are changing, and we're not seeing as much product on the shelf as we would have previously. We're seeing delays in postal. We're seeing delays in being able to get sometimes some of the most basic things into the country. So the record is over for Australia. Our quarterly growth, we've had 2 periods of quarterly negative growth, which means we are officially in recession, and we really haven't been in a position like this since the 1970s, as bad a recession as we would have seen during that period. People receiving job assistance payments has risen to 11%, and this has not fallen. Hospitality sector, for obvious reasons, with those social distancing impacts in those early stages, really got hit hard. So accommodation and food services were really hit hard during that period, which meant that it was almost skewed towards women and youth. And I saw today the Federal Treasurer announced a program looking at youth employment, and it is really important. We have significantly, this crisis has significantly hit that portion of the market. So the Sunshine States, impacts vary from state to state as well, guys. And the state final demand, when we look here in terms of our payroll jobs, we can see that, Queensland has had a fall of 5.9% compared to Victoria and New South Wales at over 8.5%. Okay, so we're in a much better position than they are. However, we did still see a fall in the amount of jobs available in the economy. When we look at our payroll job impacts, though, on the right side of the screen, we can see that Queensland's almost or starting to creep back up to our pre-COVID levels. So we're well and truly into recovery, whereas we look at Victoria, which is the bottom line, and we can see how far away from recovery that Victoria is. But our unemployment is higher than the national average, and more people have left the labour force. This is not uncommon during a recession for people to opt out. So it's a really, really common factor. And we know that participation rates in Queensland are always a little bit lower than the national average. I think it's partly to do with our lifestyle, but you can see there we're sort of bucking the trend of more people sort of leaving the labour force at the moment compared to Australia. Jobs growth has recovered to July in Queensland, but we still have an extra 150,000 people receiving job seeker benefit. So that's not job keeper, that's job seeker. So that's unemployment benefit or youth allowance. So we still have an extra 150,000 that we didn't have previously. Our coastal tourism hotspots and Inner Brizzy were hit the hardest. They've really been hit hard. And we can see up the top there, Gold Coast, Cairns, Sunny Coast, visitor economies, and Brisbane inner city, very reliant on a high number of workers coming into that part of Brisbane to access employment opportunities were hit really hard. In terms of our regions ranked in terms of closest return to payroll jobs figures, so this on the right side, we're really looking at those economies that went in pretty strong and certainly have recovered in terms of jobs quite quickly. And we can see Toowoomba there leading the pack, Central Queensland, Moreton Bay South, Brizzy East, Mackay, Isaac, Whitsunday. A lot of agricultural economies have performed well. And mining communities. It's really the Mackay, Isaac part of that equation that is driving the growth. It's certainly not the Whitsundays part of the equation. Domestic visitation to regional areas has increased substantially, and we've been using a lot of Google Analytics at the moment with their mobility data. It's free, and you can access that information. It gives you an idea of your movement around your community. And I think it's a really good tool at the moment while it's free, instead of having to use credit card data, which is actually very, very expensive to look at. So Scenic Rim, we work very closely with them around their recovery. And certainly we've seen a very big improvement in terms of numbers into their community. The other thing that we're seeing is a lot of rental shortages in rural and regional communities. Now, this is something that's relatively ongoing, but it has worsened during this period. We're also seeing land sales are up in regional communities, even compared to June of last year. So regional communities, I think, are reaping the benefit of people making lifestyle changes as they move to new destinations, and they are aware now of being able to work like this, work from their computer from anywhere. So Queensland is more vulnerable than other states to international flight restrictions, but not as vulnerable in terms of international students. And one of the things we're seeing in Sydney or Melbourne is complete apartment blocks empty, with empty cars, as international students didn't make it back for the start of university for 2020. So it's really interesting, and that's hit New South Wales and Victoria quite hard, whereas we really feel those effects in places like Cairns, the Gold Coast, Brizzy, that have a very high dependency on international visitation. And we just don't know when that's going to come back. We're just not sure what that's going to mean. Queensland will also experience much slower population growth, but due to those falls in overseas migration and less domestic movements. But we certainly aren't as vulnerable as New South Wales and Victoria. When we look there, we can see net overseas migration, New South Wales and Victoria. That's sort of the hotspots in Australia, whereas we are more reliant on that interstate migration. And we know that once the travel bans are lifted and this sort of thing, we need to start to prepare for that possible influx of Victorians into our communities. We've had a lot of sales in Brisbane of people from Victoria in particular buying without actually setting foot in the house. So it's a really interesting set of changes that are happening. And we know that the last time this happened was in the 1990s, when the unemployment rate was much higher in Victoria than it was in Queensland. And we saw a significant influx during that period of Victorians into our regions. So it's going to be a bumpy road to recovery. And I think there's these three different stages, and our recovery is more like a W this time rather than a V curve recovery as we go through those social distancing impacts, which Queensland has sort of come out the other side of, hopefully. I don't want to jinx it, but then we come into, after our social distancing impacts, as everyone has to stay at home, we're not spending our money in cafes and restaurants, and we have those impacts. Then we come into this falling investment and spending as household savings increases. People become a little bit less reluctant to invest in their businesses. Then we've got that stage 3, which is that JobKeeper ramping down. And that's an interesting one because we visited a number of regions over the last couple of days that have nobody on JobKeeper payment. So that stage 3 might not necessarily be coming for them in terms of what does this mean for our community when all these jobs are lost. And it's being able to dispel those myths and look at the reality of what is your dependency in your community on JobKeeper. And then, of course, we have those long-run structural changes and what does that look like in the future. So here we can see savings up, our household confidence has fallen, and our savings ratio is back to those 1970s levels. Business spending on R&D is back to levels of 2006. So this is something that we certainly need to keep an eye on, although Australians aren't very good at saving, I must say. So this quite possibly could be a good thing. Many jobs are vulnerable when JobKeeper is removed, and this will weigh on household spending and confidence once again. So there are some regions that are looking a lot more vulnerable than others. And we can see here Douglas, Whitsunday, Noosa, certainly up the top there, very tourism-based, very dependent on their neighbour to provide them with tourists. So they're in quite a vulnerable position. So the Queensland economy is expected to outperform the nation. Let's have a look at our regional impacts. So initially the largest impacts were in our regional areas, and that was partly because we just had bushfires. We were still in the middle of drought. There were, things hitting our regional areas as compared to our metro areas, whereas this is starting to change as we're moving through our next phase. And we can see what's happening in our border communities, in particular between New South Wales and Victoria, even between Queensland and New South Wales. Those border localities have been at a real disadvantage as well. Here's our local government area job seeker changes in Queensland. So the deeper, darker red you are, the worse off you are in terms of your job seeker changes. So this is a higher percentage of people went to job seeker. And we can see in the SEQ corner, we've got Noosa, Sunny Coast, Gold Coast and Brizzy certainly changed the most. And then we've got Cairns and Douglas up there in the north. And then we've got, we think that's Longreach in the middle there, or Winton, that are certainly also reliant on visitation as well. Agricultural regions are less exposed, and productivity within the agricultural sector is up and driving a lot of the returns to growth in a number of our communities. So here's a framework to understand the regional impacts, and I'm not going to go through this in detail, but firstly we have the social distancing impacts, for good reason, that hit our tourism destinations and hit our CBDs and activity centres. Now, that doesn't just mean the CBD of Brizzy, that also means the main street in your own locality, the main street of Cunnamulla, the main street here in Warwick. It also touches on, you know, the main street of Townsville or whatever it might be. Shopping centres really felt the full force of that. Then we've got our falling investment and spending and what that means for our export-focused economies, ag regions, and then as we move forward, we've got these long-run damage, but we've also got these opportunities that are arising out of that, particularly around, you know, local amenity, making sure our communities are looking nice as we increase our tourism base, as people have to travel domestically as compared to international, and people have pools of money there that they spend on tourism each year, and it's about being able to put up your hand to take some of that on. So the Southern Downs recovery. This is how the Southern Downs was performing prior to the COVID health crisis. So it's really interesting with the data that we have. It gets updated yearly. And what normally happens is we cut off our data period right now and we collect all the data, and then the data is released in February or March. So I was actually here just before COVID hit talking about this data. So it's really interesting that when I was talking about this data, I was saying that the Southern Downs is actually performing pretty well. And we can see there we've had some growth since 2017. So the good news is when you went into the crisis, you're in a relatively good, stable position as compared to other areas that are coming off long periods of decline. It's almost getting punched while you're down, sort of thing. So here we've got our Southern Downs industry is much less vulnerable to the impacts of COVID. So we can see ag, forestry and fishing, healthcare and social assistance, education and training, retail trade, accommodation and food services up there, but it's really balanced with these other industries. And this is our headline estimates for the Southern Downs Regional Council area. So certainly outperforming the rest of Queensland, and most of the Darling Downs Southwest region is performing really, really well. And we can see your GRP change, and this is your GRP September quarter compared to September quarter last year. You're actually performing at a higher level than you were pre-COVID. Okay, that's in terms of your gross regional product. When we look at your local job change, it's also grown by 0.6%. So the amount of jobs that you're offering within your pool of jobs, and some of those jobs might be taken up from people from Toowoomba or Gundy or whatever it might be, has grown by 0.6%. If we didn't have JobKeeper, that would have fallen by 0.1%. Okay, so there are some jobs at the moment that have been, that are being kept through the JobKeeper scheme here. Our employed resident change has grown by 2.7%. It would only have grown by 1.7% without the JobKeeper scheme. Okay, so does that make sense to everyone? Yep. So this is just a graphic of where you guys sit compared to regional Queensland, Queensland, Australia. And this is almost flipped on its head because most councils, most local government areas see a negative impact, whereas we've got the positive on the bottom rather than the top. So you can see here that Southern Downs is actually in a positive position across the board compared to the negatives of regional Queensland, Queensland and Australia. And the industries that are finding strength: healthcare and social assistance, rental, hiring, real estate, education, training, ag, forestry, fishing, manufacturing, right down to professional, scientific and tech services. So we've had a fall in construction and accommodation and food services, a little bit in transport, postal and warehousing as well. So the Southern Downs local jobs compensated by JobKeeper payments, we can see accommodation and food services. We've got over 30 jobs compensated in that sector. Healthcare and social assistance, just below 30. Education and training, retail trade, other services. So you can go through and you can actually calculate what your numbers are in terms of your vulnerability to that period in perhaps March next year. Here's our increased number of job seeker recipients. So this is what happened when in March we found out that, you know, we had to adhere to these measures and people were laid off. There were people during that period that were laid off, and this is our increase from March to September of those people accessing payments. And we can see there was an increase straight away in the Southern Downs and in every other area across the region in terms of job seeker benefits. What we want to see is whether or not we've had some recovery since July, and we have had a little bit of recovery in the Southern Downs region. We can give you the actual numbers of how many people are on job seeker in your region. So, and it's important to follow this. This gets updated monthly. So we've been really lucky during this period as well that we've been given access to data that we normally don't get access to, but the ABS and Treasury have been very generous in allowing us to you know, keep a closer eye on how things are changing frequently in our region. So we have been very lucky. So that's the job seeker there. So our move to recovery. The first thing is, guys, tourism plans. Making sure we have got those tourism plans and our strategies for domestic tourism very much front and centre. The economies that have done it very well, or the LGAs that have done it very well, Scenic Rim, Sunshine Coast, Toowoomba, have really taken advantage and shifted their whole strategy to just focus on that domestic market 110%, and it has worked. And you're mobilising an audience that has been, you know, let out of the cage almost with huge excesses of annual leave. And they're ready to travel and ready to move, and it's certainly a great opportunity. I know in Brizzy, I live in Redcliffe, and if you go to a camping or caravanning store at the moment, it is just crazy. It is ridiculous the amount of people. I've never seen stores like that so busy. So it's really interesting how things are shifting and changing. Caravans, you know, you've got a 6 to 12 month wait on caravans, so people are ready to travel and ready to move. Activity centre strategies, so for your high streets, making sure that you're just keeping an eye on that sort of thing. This also bleeds back into that domestic tourism, thinking about, well, let's make sure the amenity of our towns is spot on so that when people come here, it entices them to also think about moving. Infrastructure projects are going to be highly competitive. That should say opportunities for remote working. So remote working is going to be significantly important. I'm one of those population changes. We're actually moving to the back of Yeppoon because I can work from home from anywhere, and we've sort of just gone, bugger it, let's go out of Redcliffe. We've got feral kids that are down there, and we're ready to get them out of the city. So it's really thinking about how do you position yourself for that market that is now looking for other opportunities. And they're not necessarily having to go directly straight back into the city. You know, business owners in the city at the moment are realising that, you know, they can promote this work from home lifestyle. It can happen, and, you know, it's a great way to, I guess, engage with their staff around balance and things like that. Agriculture, food, buy local, really important, growing your local manufacturing, improving those supply chain linkages. We've broken some of our supply chain linkages with overseas. I wouldn't say we've broken, it's been difficult. It's been really challenging period for us in terms of importing and exporting. So thinking about how perhaps we can do some things locally. Our growth in online shopping, skills development, looking at that changing demand. What sort of skills do we need now? What's really going to be important for our region? Mental health programs, and of course, accessing new job trainer funding as well. So does anyone have any questions from the presentation?
Can you mention the job keeper? We can ask for those numbers. So is that profile ideal?
I'll show you now. Yeah, yep. I'll show you now. So no questions from online there, Trude?
No. Feel free to come off mute if you don't want to type it in the chat.
Does that surprise anyone? Not really?
Some of it was quite surprising.
Yep. Yeah.
That safety net, or that, I didn't think it would be quite that positive.
Yes.
Just that last little bit there.
Absolutely. And it, as I said at the start, you know, when you actually paint the picture of what this crisis has sort of, you know, how it, you know, has sort of infiltrated the community, we are very immune. You know, I was just in Cooktown presenting to the council up there, and before they started, they said, we don't even think this thing's affected us. And that's because they're a very closed economy. You know, they don't have a reliance. There's no real dependence there on, you know, those very exposed forces that have happened during this period.
It's been an odd time, obviously, for everyone, but especially here I've found, because we've been almost entirely unaffected. One case.
Yeah.
But still, the entertainment industry,
yep.
Little there is.
Yes.
Events.
Yep.
Which is my field.
Yep.
All that to fall over.
Yes.
But it's good to see that economy-wise the region reasonably strong.
And I think the good thing that I see just in, you know, being in Brisbane, and my entire you know, IG is based in Melbourne, so I'm the only one sort of let out at the minute, to be fair. And just to see the appetite for travel and the appetite to get out and about and see things that my friends or, you know, people that I am acquainted with talking about going to places that I would never have thought they would have travelled to. But there is this appetite now to do something different, because you don't have that accessibility to your traditional tourism hotspots, which might be Bali or Thailand or Fiji, or, you know, those sorts of places. So, you know, people who traditionally spend $20,000 or $30,000 a year on travel now don't have those places to go to. So it's really thinking about how do you tap into that money? How do you tap into that real value and get those people to your region? What do you do to entice them to do that? So, yeah.
It would be interesting to see what myself and Jan managed the picture information centres in Warwick and Central.
Yep.
Which are, I guess, they're a kind of snapshot.
Yes, absolutely.
Entirely honest ones. Really
5% of the visitors visit the information centre.
How many?
5%. 5%. What the usual thing is. But I see that our hospitality and accommodation is down. But if you compare Brown Belt with the rest of Queensland, we are just booming.
Yes.
But because Warwick doesn't have events, theirs is down. So I guess that's where it leads us in the middle. But it's not really a true picture of one end compared to the other. And I wonder how agriculture will go, and if you attribute a lack of backpackers to COVID, it is going to affect our agriculture hugely in the next 5 to 6 months.
That's why I'm affected to the economy. They still can't spend the economy.
Oh, absolutely, but you know, agriculture is doing okay.
Yes.
But
it's what's that long term. And it's really interesting because the JobKeeper information, you know, I'm not saying it's incorrect, but we need to just be mindful that it's a very precarious sort of program that got set up very quickly And it does distort some of what the figures distort what I hear from local knowledge. So being in Rockhampton and Yeppoon last week, giving these presentations, you know, Rocky, we'll talk about it's crazy on the ground up there. You know, it's busy and people are visiting. Yeppoon is the same. You can't, you know, you can't move in the main street. It takes you 25 minutes to get a coffee. So I have no doubt that there are some, you know, things happening, but as we go through and we continue to update the data and we see as the rules become tighter, we'll start to see how that falls out, certainly. But from all accounts on the ground in regional Queensland, I am only hearing very, very positive things. Even in Cairns Regional Council area, they are performing very well. They are having problems with obviously higher vacancies and things like that in their main street, so in their central hub, because they have no backpackers there basically and no Chinese visitors, which was a heavy component of their market. But certainly in other areas of their economy, they're performing really well. So, you know, yeah, it's interesting to see the way it's bleeding through. But now I'm going to talk to you guys about the community profile and the economy profile. So Darling Downs Southwest subscribe to this profile on behalf of councils to be able to give you guys access to the best data that you can in order to accompany your grant applications. And this isn't just the economic model, this is about telling the story. So telling the story whilst you're handing in your application. The reason why we are going for this skills development application is because in our region, we have a lower proportion of people with qualifications or whatever it might be, and being able to show that through the data. So the first place I'm going to start is on our community profile. And now I'm not going to run through everything simply because we would literally be here till tomorrow. So I'm just going to flick through certain parts so you can get a feel for what you're going to be looking at and how you'll decipher that data. The first thing I do, guys, is go straight down to the bottom of the page, and I have this menu down the bottom of items. This is all the data that is available in the top half of the site. Okay, so this, if I'm sitting and I'm going, I can't remember where she found that stuff about incomes or domestic work or volunteering or dwelling types or number of bedrooms or whatever it might be, come down to your menu and you will find it on there. And if you actually click on those topics, you will go straight to that page. Okay, so it's a really easy way to help you navigate the site. The first page I'm going to take you to is the population highlights. And the reason I like this page is because if I don't know an area, and sometimes I get sent to South Australia or Outback Western Australia, and I think I don't know anything about these places, I come on here and I click my population highlights page, and straight away I can get a feel for that local government area. So when I come on here, I can get data for the whole broader region, or I can break it down into any of these council areas right down to an overlay area, which is the Southwest Reds region. Okay, so when I come on here, I see Southern Downs, 35,452, declined by 141 from the previous year. I can see my change over time, so it's been very static. I can see my median age is high compared to Queensland, regional Queensland and Australia. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander is about the same. Couples with children, lower. We've got a lower proportion of medium high density, higher proportion of lone person households. We can go through all of these data tiles to get an idea of what's happening in your community straight away. Overseas born, 10% compared to regional Queensland and Queensland. So I would be saying it's a very, you know, white community essentially when I'm thinking about Queensland. University qualifications are lower, so you probably don't have a university in your region. Participation rate is very low as well. So we can go through all of these data sets in order for me to go, okay, I think I've got a bit of an idea of what that community might look like. What you can also do, guys, is you can export that page into PDF, okay? And you can just send it to yourself and you can print it out, and then you've got that very nuanced data right at your fingertips. The next place I'm going to go to is my how old are we? and I'm going to have a look at my 5-year age groups. And now how old are we really is a bit of the backbone of your economy and your placement in terms of where you are going to put infrastructure, parks, playgrounds, whether or not you need to focus on residential care services, that sort of thing. So straight away, I get this question derived from the census. So what is the person's date of birth or age, referring to the total population? And when I move down here, I get my data table. I can change that area. So if I want to look at Toowoomba or I want to look at Quilpie, I can change that area. I'm going to stay on Southern Downs because that's where we are. And I can also change my benchmark area. Now, this is really important to know that if you are going for a grant with the state government, change your benchmark area to Queensland. If you are going for a grant with the Aussie government, change it to Australia, okay? Because it allows you to compare against all of the rest of Australia or all of the rest of Queensland. Okay, so I'm going to put this on Queensland and I'm going to move down past my data table. Not that I don't love data, but I like charts better because straight away I can see exactly what's happening in my community. And I can see this is my dominant age category, okay, 55 plus. And compared to Queensland here, we can see we have a much higher proportion of elderly living in our community. So it's really thinking about that. What does that mean for our area? And here's our workers. This is our working population. So really thinking about how do we create jobs in that area that help us to build this part of the community, which helps us build our young in the community. So that's our dominant age structure in the Southern Downs area. What we want to look at now is, well, how is it changing over time? And we can see we're dominant in those older age categories. And this is where we're seeing most of our change, is our 55 plus. So it's thinking about, okay, so what does that mean in terms of service delivery from council's perspective? What does that mean in terms of events? What does that mean in terms of, you know, primary schools, all of these sorts of things. So internet connectivity, safety, the types and styles of housing that we offer, all of this sort of stuff. So it gives me straight away a really good idea. When we come down, we've got our dominant and emerging groups analysis. You can use any of that written information as you feel, okay? So that's my dominant and emerging groups. That's my age profile. The next thing I normally look at is my birthplace. So one of the things that councils do is they hand out disaster management information, rates information, information's about your dogs, all of this sort of thing. So you can come down here and you can look at in which country was the person born, referring to the total population. And we can get here some information, our total overseas born, how many Australian, how many didn't state, and what's my total population. When I move down, I can also get my birthplace ranked by size. So I can start to have a look at, well, what migrants do I have coming in? And let's have a look straight at our charts and we can see United Kingdom and New Zealand are our predominant birthplaces in this community. The next ones we're looking at Italy, Philippines, Netherlands, Germany. So this is all our dominant birthplace, so our dominant migrants in our community. Here we see our change in our birthplace and we can see New Zealand, we're still getting those guys, Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, South Africa, United States of America. So we're starting to see a shift in the types of people that are coming into our community. And what does that mean in terms of languages? What does that mean in terms of communication? That sort of thing. So it's really important to keep an eye on this one. I think there's probably some communities in Southern Australia that perhaps didn't keep as close an eye on this and really are in a catch-up phase of the types and styles of people coming into their communities and how what sort of housing do they provide, what sort of, I know in Cairns at the moment, they provide disaster management information in 12 different languages. Okay, so it's really important that we keep an eye on what's happening in terms of our communities. So the other thing in Who Are We I'm going to go to is our qualifications. Okay, and when we move down, I'm going to come straight down here to our chart and we can see here there's a higher proportion of people in the Southern Downs region that have no qualification. Okay, We're higher in terms of vocational studies, which is nice. So it really shows the type of worker we have in our community, that we attract to our community. When we come down, this is a good sign. So we can see an increase in the amount of people with vocational studies in the community and advanced diplomas and bachelor or higher degrees during that period. So we're becoming more educated. If I was going for a grant application, this is for skills and development, this is probably the chart that I would be taking out and putting as part of my grant application. So exporting that file, copying it to clipboard and putting it into my presentation. Okay. So that's our qualifications. What do we do? I'm going to leave simply because we'll go through a lot of that in the economy section. The thing I'm going to look at in how do we live is our household summary. Okay, so we saw there was a really aging component in the community. Now we want to have a look at the household type. So are they couples with children, couples without children, one parent families, group households, lone persons, this sort of thing. So we can start to get a feel for our household type compared to our dwelling structures in our community and what we're supporting. So we can see a much higher proportion of couples without children, so our retirees perhaps, and our lone person households. Okay, so couples without children and lone person, and then let's see where we're changing. Our major changes in couples without children and lone person household. And that lone person household is something as a council working with developers needs to really think about. And how do we cater for that proportion of the population? How do we allow them to age in place in your community? So once again, guys, when you come down to the bottom, you can see dominant and emerging groups as well. Okay, so you want, once again, you get that analysis. You guys can use that analysis in anything, anything that you're doing. Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is in how do we live is our dwelling type. So we saw we've got these, you know, couples without children and lone person. Now we want to have a look at, well, what's the type and style of housing that we have in our community? And we can look at separate house, medium density, high density. I'm going to come straight down to the bottom. We can see over 80%, over 85% of housing in this community is a separate house. Okay, we've got a small proportion of medium density down here as well. So let's have a look at our change in our housing structure. So we can see we're starting to balance out a little bit more and offer that medium density perhaps to, you know, people within our community, whether it's residential care services, that sort of thing as well. But it's certainly thinking about how do we cater for that segment of the population. Toowoomba has done a lot of work around this. They have this very similar profile, and certainly, you know, they've thought about things like safety, access to public transport, access to, you know, other services, healthcare services, to ensure that people can age in place and are able to walk and to various areas and that sort of thing. So they've put a lot of work and a lot of time into looking at what's happening in their lone person households. I'm going to skip right down here, guys, to our job seeker information. And job seeker is what I showed you on the presentation. This is where I get my numbers. So every month this is going to get updated. So this will be updated shortly with October figures. And you can see here you get an exact amount of people in your community that are accessing job seeker and youth allowance payments. Okay, so we can see here 2,617 in your community are accessing those benefits. All right, compared to 1,836 in March of 2020. So we can see it's increased by 781. So it's really thinking about what does that mean and how, and ensuring that as we look at the figures coming through, that that figure is moving in the opposite direction.
Only do a 6 month contract, so next month it'll be October, April? Or?
Yep, so you can do it from July. So the other one I did was I went, okay, I want to see how you guys are going from, you know, August to September. Has that improved? Let's have a look. So we can see, yes, it has. Even from that period, you lost, you know, you had 74 people come off job seeker benefit. So it's being able to measure that month to month and seeing how you're progressing in that area. It's really good data. I really, really like it. I think it's good and timely information and gives you a good idea of how whether or not the things that you're hearing on the ground are actually, you know, coming to fruition in terms of the factual data that we get through, because it's good to marry the two together. Yes. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's an interesting time as people change their preferences, and you know, will people go back, you know, to their habits that they had previously, you know, and that comes through everything, like even, you know, tourism. You know, it's really going to shift the way we think about things for a long period of time, or, you know, and until we get a good vaccine that we know is, you know, going to work or whatever.
There was a stat on the Sunshine Coast,
yeah.
There was a 300% increase in sales of motorbikes on the
Yes.
Sunshine Coast that month, because people decided they weren't having those,
yeah. Well, that's right. There's a year-long wait on caravans. I couldn't believe it. I was, and we've already got one, but our friends are buying one who said, well, we normally spend about 30 grand a year on travel, so we bought a van for 30,000 and we're going to just chop off. And I'm like, well, yeah, because that's probably your next 2 to 3 years. You know, when you think about, you know, people's safety and what's happening overseas, you know, yeah, I can't see, even with the vaccine, I just can't see how I'm not sure that I would have the confidence to, you know, be in that environment just right now, you know, but yeah. I know. That's right. Yeah, because you're dependent on the success or failure of other countries' policies, you know, and at the moment there's not, you know, there's probably very few countries that I could look at and say they've really handled it very well, but they also are not going to expose themselves to the risk of second and third, fourth waves, that sort of thing. So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. If there's any time for regional Australia to shine, this is the time. This is it. So now, guys, we come down here and we can also download a report for all of those variables that we had in there for any of the areas under the RDA DDSW profile, and we can see, you just click on all of these things. So if I want to look at incomes, unpaid work, and then I come down and I just put my email address in there and send myself a document in Word or PDF. I would suggest send it to yourself in Word and just take out all the stuff that you don't need, that's not necessary. Otherwise, you're going to have this huge document, of which half of it you don't necessarily need. So that's my community profile. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Is there a disposable income in there?
Yep. So if we look here, we can go to, where's my income? Individual incomes. Yeah, so you can look at your individual incomes. And you can get your categories there for what people earn as well. And then you've got your household income and that sort of thing. So we'll head over now to the economic profile. And the economic profile, guys, has over 1,200 sets of data. Okay, so there's lots and lots and lots of information on here. What I'm going to do is show you the places that I think are really important to know and that you can monitor, because as I say, the new data is coming out next year in sort of March, April, or February, March, April. And so we'll be able to see how you've tracked over that following year in a lot more detail across all of this information I'm going to show you now. So it's really important during that period to know straight away where I need to go to see how I've performed. Once again, you've got this menu down the bottom that you can use. Okay, and that also gives us our income quartiles of local workers, and you can actually break down those incomes into industry. Okay, so if you want to look at individuals' incomes in agriculture, you can look at agriculture or manufacturing or whatever it might be. Okay, so I'm going to come up here, and the first place I'm going to go to is economic indicators, and I'm going to go to gross product because I want to know how my economy is performing. When I move down here, I go to my drop down and I select Southern Downs Regional Council. My benchmark is Queensland, and this is where I had that chart before that I had in my presentation. This is where I took that from. So I took it directly from the site, and you can export it into any of these files and put it straight into your presentation. Now, there are different ways to display your information. So depending on what story you want to tell, we can start to say, here's our cumulative change in gross regional product. Here's my annual change in my gross regional product compared to Queensland. Here is my actual figures in terms of my gross regional product. So there's different ways of being able to express your data. And for example, you know, we have a lot of councils that will use this as part of their communication strategy. So saying my change from the previous year was 2.1% positive in terms of GRP. So the marketing and comms team will straight away grab this information and it'll hit the front page of the Warwick Herald or whatever, you know, newspaper you guys have. So it's important to know when those new figures come in to have a look at this and say, okay, what data do we want to use? What do we want to actually send to the media as well? So the next one we look at is gross product. Then we want to look at local employment. So gross product is very important. It talks to me about how well your industries are performing, but we also want to see whether or not that relays through to actual job numbers. Okay, and we can see here that since 2017, that GRP growth has been accompanied by jobs growth as well. And when we move down, once again, we get all of these different ways to showcase our change in our jobs, and we get our figures. So we can see there was a 4.76% change in jobs. You know, we start to say, you know, I used to, when I worked for Cairns Regional Council, you know, look at this and deduct those figures and say we've actually gained 760 jobs during this period or whatever it might be, and shoot that out through Facebook. Did you know that this year whatever it might be, our economy grew by X amount? So they're little things that you can bring your community along for that journey as well. But, you know, you want to pick the story that you're certainly telling as well. So here's our unemployment rate. And unemployment, as you can see for you guys, bounces around, okay? So unemployment's not my favourite measure to use, but it is there, and it is a comparative tool that grant bodies or other organisations will use to determine how successful you guys are at any point in time. And we can see at the moment, compared to, you know, not that long ago, it's gone from 7.9% down to 3.5%. And we once again have lots of different ways to display this information, and we can get that in terms of real numbers as well. So we've got this prior to COVID, we've got 610 people, 718, and so on and so forth. And we can come down and get this data table right back down to 2010. We can show those changes over time. So you guys will be able to see, and you can see your unemployed people in December each year tends to be December and January. Oh no, maybe not. It's really interesting. Okay, so that's our unemployment. The next one we look at is our building approvals. Now, building approvals gives me a bit of insight into what perhaps might happen into the future and how the economy is going to perform over the next period. And we can see this is our 2019-20, this is 2021. So we're only up to August. Okay, so we can see that, you know, that's still got almost a year pretty much to go before we see, you know, what's happened this year. However, January, February, a lot of councils will come to us and we start to talk about what's happening in terms of their building approvals and whether or not there's something that council can do to try and support applications through the pipeline to support their construction industry. So that's the 4 that I would look at. Gross product, local employment, tell me how we've performed over time. Unemployment is just something I need to know. You need to know that figure. Building approvals, because it gives me a snapshot into what perhaps we could expect moving into the future, particularly around construction. The next area I go to is my economic value. And I click on value added in this area because I want to know about our profitability, about our productivity. I want to know how our industries are performing and whether or not they're you know, making a profit. And we can come down here. The first thing I'm going to do is change my comparison year to 17-18 because I want to know what's happened over that previous year. So when your new data sets come in, the first thing that you guys are going to do next year is change that number to 18-19. Okay, so you're comparing over the previous year to say, well, what happened during that year? And you'll know from some of these things, you'll be able to look at this and go, okay, we had growth in ag. Yep, I know that that's happened because so-and-so's farm went gangbusters and they started exporting to whatever. Or there'll be things on the ground that you know have happened that have created that stimulus. So we can see during that period, agriculture improved, manufacturing as well. We can see food product manufacturing is up. And we can click, guys, on all of these drop downs. So heavy and civil, did we have a road or something being graded or a road development or a bridge, something like that during that period? Yeah, yeah. Retail trade was down during that period, particularly food retailing. Don't know why that's doing that, but yeah, that's right. It's a beep. It's a beep. Residential care services was up during that period, which is a good sign given our change in our population. Medical and other health services and hospitals. So we can see healthcare has really been driving a lot of our growth. But this is a really good tool to use, guys. This is really important to drill down into each of those sectors at the high level and see what's happening in your subsectors. Yep, so it comes from a variety of sources. So with our economic tool, it's not just ABS census data. It's data from ATO, Centrelink, Dun & Bradstreet data. It's data from the Labour Force Survey, household expenditure. There's a whole raft of different data sources that come into play to develop this export-import data, journey to work data. There's a whole range of things that come into it. Payroll data now, which is great. And that creates the model and creates, I guess, the overarching figures of what's happening in your community. Yeah. So we move through here, guys. When you come down, you once again get your charts. So we can see agriculture is certainly creating our greatest value. Construction, which is why it's really important we keep an eye on those building approvals because that's really supported some growth. Healthcare and social assistance, education and training, even manufacturing in terms of our value add. Then we move down here and we can see how that's changed between 17-18 and 18-19. So we can see our greatest amount of change was in healthcare and social assistance. Okay, once again, we get this analysis down the bottom with dominant and emerging groups. So you can use any of that information in your council reports or whatever it might be. So when we come back up here, guys, the next one I want to look at is my local employment. So that's my value add, and I'm breaking that down by industry. Now I want to look at my employment, and I can see in ag, we actually gained 356 staff during that period. 108 in manufacturing, so 40 in food product manufacturing, 40 in fabricated metal production. We lost some in retail trade, gained in accommodation food services, gained in healthcare and social assistance. So we can see how we fared across all of those sectors, which is great. Once again, we get our charts and we can see ag right out the front, healthcare, social assistance, retail is a big employer here. So, you know, tourism is important to your economy, bringing new money in, not just circulating your local money, but bringing new money into the community. And here's our change in employment over time. So we can see over that time period, ag and healthcare really setting the standard there. So that's our local employment, guys. So we've looked here. So feel free to go through and have a look at all of the different variables. You can't break this tool. Trudy's telling everyone we can't break it. I'm hoping we can't, but I'm pretty sure we can't. Challenge. So, here's something that I think is really important. Okay, this is our industry focus. So some councils, some people on the Zoom will have particular areas of interest that they work in. Okay, so it might be healthcare and social assistance, it might be in manufacturing, it might be in agriculture. This here is going to give me a really good idea of what's happening just in those sectors. Okay, so when I click on industry sector analysis and I move down to my bar here, I can see I've got Southern Downs, I've got my benchmark is Queensland, and I can click on all of my industries or subsectors, so my sectors or subsectors. So if I want to have a look at what's happening in food product manufacturing, I can move down here and I've got my comparison year is 17-18. And what it's going to tell me is some information about the food product manufacturing sector in this region. So if someone comes to the council and says, we're thinking about setting up this food product manufacturing cannery or whatever it might be, you can download this information and provide it to them, and it gives them an idea of how many people are employed in food product manufacturing, what the total output is. We've got here our exports, domestic versus international, which is interesting because the more international we have, the more exposure we have had during this crisis. So lots of councils at the moment have been working through this data in particular to look at how exposed they are to COVID. We can see here our economic output per destination. So we've got our domestic exports from the Southern Downs area. We've got our local sales in food product manufacturing, and then we've got our international exports here in food product manufacturing. So it gives me an idea straight away of the exposure that you might have. Then we've got this industry contribution to Queensland, okay, in terms of employment, in terms of full-time employment, output, all the way down to local sales. Okay, so that's for food product manufacturing. So you can do that for any of these sectors that you want to look at over time. So sometimes councils might say, well, this year we're going to focus on ag, tourism, and retail, or whatever it might be. So then you can go through and you can print out these things and go, okay, let's have a look at how we're actually performing. What does this look like? And you can export that entire page into a PDF. Okay, so any of the information that you see in there, it's really easy to download it. You can just download it straight away. The other thing that we can do is this time series industry sector analysis. So we've got our industry sector analysis. Now we've got our time series data. So time series is all about showing me what's happening over time. And with our food product manufacturing here, we've got our employment totals. Let's move down the bottom and we can see exactly what's happened in terms of employment in this particular sector and how we've performed since 2003. Okay, so straight away you can start to get a feel of, wow, what happened in 2016 to 17? What happened during that period? Was that an abattoir? I'm not sure. You know, that sort of thing that has moved out of the particular region. Then we can see our employment annual change over time and our time series employment as a percentage of a benchmark. And then we've got our index of employment compared to Queensland. So there's all different ways to display the data. And once again, guys, you can do that for any of your industries. So if you're interested in healthcare and you want to make sure in terms of lobbying to the state government around healthcare and social assistance, is our employment in this industry, you know, keeping pace with the changes in our community? You can also, guys, look at output total sales. You can look at exports in that particular sector, imports, local sales, worker productivity as well. So when you come down, you can see that in terms of healthcare and social assistance, we've seen an increase in employment over time. Okay, And then once again, you get all of the different ways of actually displaying the data. So we're starting to catch up here, back to state government, back to Queensland levels. So that's our industry focus. The next thing I'm going to quickly show you is just some key statistics on your resident workforce. Okay, so if you're looking at your resident workforce, okay, and you're saying, I want to know the key statistics of all my industries of my resident workers. So 3,230 people have a tertiary qualification. So there's little bits of data snippets that you can get. You can break this down per industry. So let's say, for example, we'll do public admin and safety. And we can have a look here and go, okay, how many are male? How many are female? What's the age structure of our workforce in public admin and safety? What are our top 3 occupations? Are we more inclined to have full-time or part-time? How qualified are they? What are the individual incomes of people within that sector? How do they travel to work? Do they speak a language other than English? So there's all of this detail that we can grab for any of the industries that sit under the ANZIC code. We can look at healthcare and social assistance, education and training, a whole raft of things. The next one I'm going to look at, guys, is my tourism sector analysis. And I'm not sure, sometimes some regions don't get access to a great amount of data because of the way the data is collected. But this gives us an idea of how many people are employed in this sector, both directly and indirectly. When we come down here, it talks to me about the value of tourism and hospitality compared to Queensland. And when we come down here, we can see how we've been performing in terms of tourism. And since 2015, we've seen some improvement in our tourism industry, a bit of a fall away from 18-19, and it'll be really interesting to see how we go from 19-20. One of the things that you guys should look at is that Google Analytics data. So if you just put into Google Analytics data, you should be able to get a printout of all of the Queensland councils, and they do it over a 7-day rolling average. So you can keep a close eye on it. Yeah, Google mobility data. Yeah. Yeah, it's really, really good. Here's our employment in tourism as well. We can see from 2016, we've had some improvements, bit of a fall away over the last year. And then one of the things we can do is we can look at our tourism visitor summary. So that's our tourism sector analysis. It gives me an idea of how the tourism industry is performing. Now we want to look at our numbers. So sometimes I'm just going to go straight down. So here's our exposure in terms of international visitor nights. When you compare that to Queensland, you know, it's a lot less. Our domestic visitor nights is what drives a lot of our tourism economy. And then we've got these domestic day trippers that are important as well. So it's really capturing, these are the two that we really want to home in on at this point in time. So we can see what's happened between 2017-18 and 2018-19. So we had more domestic day trippers. We had very similar or less domestic visitor nights and very much less international tourists. So it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of the new tourism data as well. Economic forecast, guys, the COVID-19 forecast. This is where I got all of the information around your quarterly impacts. So looking at what's happening in the Southern Downs Regional Council area. And if you actually drop that down, you can grab that for any other shire in the region and council area. And you click down and you can see this is what's driving your return to growth. And if you just hover over each of those, it talks to us about how much that's improving. And then here, if you hover over these little areas, it gives you this sort of information that you probably can't read from there, but it'll say local jobs change without JobKeeper, local jobs change, and jobs compensated by JobKeeper. So in healthcare and social assistance, we've got 28 jobs being compensated by JobKeeper.
a quick
Okay.
question.
Yep.
From online, can you just copy and paste any of the tables that were asked to look at?
Yep, so you just can export this page. You can export, well, this chart here, or what I tend to do is export the entire page into a PDF. So you can export and it will give you all of that written material as well as the charts and the data tables. So the last thing to look at is the economic impact model. And the economic impact model is what councils, funding bodies, not-for-profits, community groups use in order to apply for grants and applications. Never works the first time for me. No, never does, never does. Oh, it's annoying. And this is a great tool for, I will save that, for anyone who's looking to measure the impact of any kind of stimulus on your economy, whether it's a new road, whether it's an event, whether it's a, you know, a new office building, whether it's, we know that Shine Lawyers is going to move out here and bring 10 staff, that sort of thing. We're able to measure all of those variables through this model. Okay, so I'm going to come back down here. I'm going to click on economic impact model. And I'm going to run you through a dummy project. Well, it's not a dummy project. It's actually something that's happening in St. George at the moment. They've got a community centre that they're building. First thing I do is I select my industry. Okay, normally projects will have two phases. They will have a building and construction phase, and then their second phase will be the operational phase. So what is the project for? Why did we build that particular building? So I've put in building construction. When you put in building construction, it's almost always in sales dollars. Okay, this is a community centre and it's costing them $3.5 million to build. Okay, so I'm going to submit that through the model. And what the model's going to do is use all of the data that I just talked about for Southern Downs to enable you guys to create an overview of how that money moves through your economy. So the first thing we can see here is it gives us our starting position of the Southern Downs Regional Council area in building construction and in all industries. Then we've got our impacts on the Southern Downs Regional Council economy. Our direct impact is 3.5 million. That's what the project costs. Then we've got our industrial impact is 0.77. Okay, then we've got our consumption impact. Now our industrial impact is when we go and buy things like steel and bricks and cement and whatever else, and we get people in to do certain things. Then we've got our consumption impact as people that are working on the project are spending money in our community. The total impact on the Southern Downs Regional Council economy, starting at $3.5 million, comes to $4.48 million. So that's your impact on your region. These things underneath that say the type 1 and type 2 multiplier, they are unique to the Southern Downs region. And the reason why they are unique is because your construction workers or your manufacturing workers are different to and provide a different set of circumstances, spending habits than other construction workers all around the country. So we need that to be unique for your particular area. Okay, so that's what your type 1 and type 2 multipliers help to decide the results up here. When we come down, we've got our impact on the Queensland economy. So the total impact outside of the Southern Downs, 0.9 million. Our total impact on the Queensland economy is 5.38 million. Our total impact on the Australian economy is 6.98 million. Okay, so depending on where you're going for your application will depend on what figures you want to quote. When we come down here, guys, you get all of the information on how the tool, you know, what the tool means and what the different variables mean and how you work it out and all of that sort of thing. Right down to the point of we're going to create 9 jobs in the Southern Downs Regional Council with this project in construction. We're going to create 1 in transport postal warehousing, 1 in professional scientific tech services. When we move down, we can see how that spans out across those industries, resident employment impacts, value added by industry, and you can export all of that information in Word or PDF to accompany your grant application. Okay, so that would be the building and construction phase. The next phase of this particular project in St George is they have some public servants that will be going in there, because it's sort of like a community centre, library, and what we'll change that to is jobs. And it's actually going to be 3 jobs in this community centre. Okay, so I've put in public administration. We know that 3 people are going to be employed full time there, and we submit that through the model. And then the same thing, guys, we've got our direct impact is 0.29, our industrial impact 0.05, right down to our total impact is about $400,000 on the economy. Then we come back, total impact on the Queensland economy 0.49, total impact on Australia 0.67. And you get the same detail down below. Okay, so the next thing you'll do is export that into Word or PDF, send that to yourself, take out the bits that you don't need, and accompany that to your application. So that would be the economic impact of that project. You've got your building and construction, and then you've got your operational phase. Okay. The last thing, I did say that was the last thing, but this is the last thing. We've also got our economic overview. So if you come in here, you can actually click on these variables, same as in the profile space, and enter your email into there and send yourself the report. Okay, so you always get this section in here called downloads, and you can download those, the entirety of your reports into there.
Those ones are publicly available. Everything else that's shown here today is currently publicly available, except that economic impact. We'll have to do a little bit of training to know what's putting in there. We don't want anyone attaching a report where you put in the wrong stuff in your grant application and then you miss out on it. Everything else is already publicly available. We've got full access to all of it right now. However, if anybody wants those others, they can economic impact model or your council or RDA. We are more than happy to help.
Yes. And often we will at ID get people contact us, and then we will say, we never give out the passwords. We then direct them to those councils and say, it's up to the councils to work with you, because it's not, you know.
EU at sbrc.qld.gov.au.
And then the RDA website, or admin app will be usually is a lot faster than me, because you can see whereas online is faster. So I'm saying for letters of support, and you can get a letter of support by emailing us as well, and particularly think it's a project which is really rare. I always say to everybody, if you're putting in a grant application, 4 easy letters of support that are fairly essential should be your federal member, your state member, your local council, and your local RDA. Straight away, there are 4 simple letters of support that you should have. Then whatever you're applying for, you will go get that's all more specific to grants. If you're going for a disability grant, if you've got a disability organisation in your region, if you wanted to go get a letter of support from them. Okay, so certainly keep us in mind for that. Anyone online that has a question? Feel free to come off mute or type it in. You're all good.
Cool.
Kat, are you done?
Done, mate.
I'm going to take a video off so everyone can see that you actually are a real human here at the music at the background for me. She's a real human. She's done 1,500 kilometres in 3.5 days.
Yes, I'm speaking very fast now.
A passenger for 1,500 days for 3.5 days. But we are really here. He's at the you can see some faces. Thank you to all those that attended in person and on Zoom. We had a mix across the region with different people on both Zoom and in person. I mean, one of our Zoom meetings was up to 19 on one of the 7 workshops. So a varied number across the region. Thank you everyone for attending. And if you need any other further information, you know where to find us, admin at or director at, keep us in mind for those sorts of things. And yeah, as we say often along the work, we're challenging it, you can't break it. So get on there, search it, try and find the data that you're after.
Sorry guys, just in case you missed that, you can't break it. We don't think so anyway. So feel free, get on there, search it, really be clear on what problem or what grant criteria you're trying to answer. Use it for your marketing and your comms and your social media. As you said, you can copy some of those tables and you can use that in your marketing or in a report easily. It's not just for grants. It's for whenever you're trying to tell a story. My biggest tip would be very clear on your grant criteria when you are answering a grant, and make sure you go find the data to prove what you want to say. So that's it from RDA. Thank you, Kat, for being on tour with me for the last 3.5 days, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. All right, see you everyone.